Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. The Alberta government announced some changes to our healthcare system. We have an update from Health Minister Adriana LaGrange. As Prime Minister Justin Trudeau pleads for a humanitarian pause in Gaza, Ottawa says 75 people with connections to Canada were able to leave the war-torn region. And Remembrance Day is just around the corner. We have details as to where you can honor our veterans in Lethbridge on November 11th.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. The Alberta government announced some changes to our healthcare system. That includes transitioning the AHS into an organization which focuses more on hospital care, urgent care, cancer care, surgeries, and emergency medical services. It will also answer to a 7-member board.
We are refocusing Alberta Health Services so that we can provide a high-functioning healthcare system that prioritizes patient care and empowers our healthcare workers. We are beginning this change by listening to the healthcare workforce and to Albertans. Throughout this process, we will rely on the expertise of healthcare workers and will work with them to make changes for the better. We will also listen to Albertans who use the system every day to ensure their experiences and ideas are part of these changes.
Alberta NDP leader Rachel Notley says the changes will open the door to privatization. Premier Daniel Smith said, quote, "There's absolutely no plan to privatize health care." Our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent for the National Post, Tyler Dawson, has more now on these changes and how they will unfold. Dawson says talk of the proposed changes actually came out in a leaked document earlier this week. Yes, there will be big changes.
It's a big overhaul, and I think, at this point, people are still sort of trying to digest it and figure out what it means. But the Coles Notes version of it is that you're going to have 4 sort of separate agencies running healthcare in the province. You're going to have AHS is going to be responsible for hospitals and acute care. You're going to have a separate board for addictions and mental health, a separate board for continuing care, and a separate board for primary care.
Later in our show, our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson will also discuss how our province is tackling the opioid crisis. Alberta's on pace to have its worst year ever for opioid deaths. Critics of Alberta Premier Daniel Smith say she wants to dissolve Alberta Health Services. However, the Premier says that's not the case. Now, at a news conference recently, she corrected a journalist by saying she's not looking to dismantle AHS, but instead to disaggregate it.
I think Alberta Health Services, the way I think about it, is Alberta Hospital Services. They should be providing the very best acute care in our 106 or so acute care facilities that we have across the country, or across the province. And so some of the things that you've already seen, you'll see a little bit more of. For instance, we already began the process of disaggregating mental health and addiction. It's a separate ministry that has it's a separate authority, and more of those resources are going to fall under mental health and addiction. You saw a couple of weeks ago primary health care. That is now also a separate pillar. One of the things we were surprised by is that primary health care really is the responsibility of the department, and yet the department only has 8 staff, whereas AHS has 122. So that's an imbalance. So we're pulling out and disaggregating primary care so we can address that as well. We've got a new doctors negotiation going on right now with an MOU with the new president, AMA President Dr. Paul Parks, and we also have a new arrangement we have to sign with our nurse practitioners so that they can set up their own practices as well.
The Alberta government has responded to a scathing report by the Office of the Auditor General of Canada. The commissioner of the report says Ottawa will fail to meet its own 2030 emissions targets. Jerry DeMarco also said that the federal government uses poor modeling with faulty assumptions, little analysis, and no peer review. The report also said the Trudeau government's target of making 80% of its fleet net zero by the year 2030 won't likely happen. Instead, it'll be closer to only 1%.
We found that the plan was insufficient to meet Canada's target to reduce emissions by 40 to 45% below the 2005 level by 2030.
Since we presented our emissions reduction plan last year, our government has put in place a number of new measures. I'll name a few. We've tabled draft regulations for the zero emission vehicle mandate. We've tabled draft regulations for the clean electricity regulation to have a net zero grid by 2035. We have eliminated fossil fuel subsidies. We're the only country in the G20 to have done that, and we've done so 2 years in advance of that.
The report also added that there are not enough charging stations in the country for EVs, and Ottawa doesn't even know where EV chargers should be set up. Alberta Environment Minister Rebecca Schultz says Ottawa really needs to stay in its own lane. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is pleading for a humanitarian pause in the Israel-Hamas war while hundreds with ties to Canada wait for a chance to be evacuated. Trudeau spoke with reporters ahead of his weekly caucus meeting on Parliament Hill. He says his government is trying to evacuate as many from Gaza as quickly as possible.
A humanitarian pause is going to allow all the hostages to be released, allow us to continue doing the work of getting all foreign nationals out of Gaza. We got 75 of 80 Canadians out yesterday, which is solid progress, but there is so much more to do. And a pause long enough to start not just getting aid in, but getting resources and medication and supports while we begin doing the work of de-escalating the situation, and not just in Gaza, but in the West Bank, where there's increasing violence, danger of it spreading into Lebanon, and where we actually start doing the work of the real heavy lifting that's going to be required to get back on track to a two-state solution.
Thousands of people have died since the October 7th attack by the terrorist group Hamas in southern Israel, which left more than 1,400 people dead. Since that time, Israel has launched a ground offensive, which has reportedly claimed the lives of more than 10,000 Palestinians so far. A large caravan of Palestinian evacuees grabbed some of their belongings and were seen walking south within Gaza to try and escape the war between Israel and Hamas.
إسرائيل بتقتلش حماس بس بتقتلش مقاومين بتقتل أطفال بتقتل نساء بتقتل شيوخ هيك قد إسرائيل بتنزل العمارة على أطفال 70 طفل و30 مرة بقلبها طلع لي واحد من حماس.
Meanwhile, a special vigil was held in Jerusalem by friends and family members of the more than 200 hostages who were kidnapped following last month's attack by Hamas terrorists in southern Israel.
The hostages have been underground in Gaza for 32 days. I cry out to every single person here and every single person on the planet to make it your mission to free these souls.
G7 nations have announced a unified stance on the Israel-Hamas war after intensive meetings in Tokyo, Japan. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says many agree that Israel has every right to defend itself. He says the group stands with Israel.
The G7 ministers reaffirmed our staunch support for Israel's right and obligation to defend itself and seek to ensure the attacks of October 7th can never happen again in accordance with international humanitarian law. We had in-depth discussions about the steps that we are taking to address urgent needs on the ground. We all agreed that humanitarian pauses would advance key objectives: to protect Palestinian civilians, to increase the sustained flow of humanitarian assistance, to allow our citizens and foreign nationals to exit, and to facilitate the release of hostages.
Fred Fleitz is a former National Security Council and CIA official who is now with the America First Policy Institute. He responded to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's recent comments that there's no room for a ceasefire, especially when Hamas still holds more than 200 people hostage. He recently shared his thoughts on TBN's Centerpoint program.
Hamas can no longer have Gaza to use as a terrorist base of operations and plot the destruction of the State of Israel. There was a theory that it could be contained and left there, and that obviously was a serious mistake. Combat operations are increasing. They're going to get more aggressive. There's going to be bad stuff on the internet. And what Netanyahu did today was to try to answer concern in the United States, the possibility of Joe Biden going wobbly on a ceasefire. And he said in his speech, you know, America didn't call for a ceasefire after Pearl Harbor was attacked. And it's just important to recognize that this is going to be difficult. There's going to be bad press. There's going to be bad optics. But Israel's going to do what it has to do to defend its security, and it's not going to be pressured by the American left or the Biden administration not to do what it has to do.
Well, we had some sunshine mixed with clouds today in southwestern Alberta, and not bad temperature-wise. Jeanette Rocher is now with an early look at the forecast. Jeanette, it appears as though warmer weather is shaping up as we get closer to Remembrance Day on Saturday.
Yeah, that's right. We should be seeing some nice clear skies and even some double digits as we move into the weekend for Remembrance Day. And that should make it so nice for those outdoor Remembrance Day ceremonies for sure, like the one at the Cenotaph downtown. This evening, though, we're looking at an overnight low of -7. We could see wind gusts up to 70 kilometers per hour, but that should be lightening up by midnight. And then as we get into tomorrow, Thursday, mainly sunny skies, high of 7 degrees. And we're just going to be climbing as we continue on into that long weekend. And I'll be back later in the show to give you more details about that.
Great, thanks so much. And as Jeanette mentioned, the Remembrance Day ceremonies kick off Saturday, November 11th at the Cenotaph by Yates Theatre, beginning at 10:45 a.m. Lots of guest speakers. Be sure to take the family. Now, today is National Indigenous Veterans Day. Many Canadians are not aware of the many sacrifices Indigenous people made in fighting for our freedoms and helping to form the Canada we enjoy today. Charles Crowchief is the son of an Indigenous First World War veteran who fought at Vimy Ridge. BCN's Naveen Day sat down with Crowchief to hear some of the stories his father passed down to him.
You may recognize this mountain as Vimy Peak in Waterton. However, to the Blackfoot people, it is Mestoi Nanastiko, which translates to Crowchief Mountain, named after Joe Crowchief. Crowchief fought in the First World War, particularly in the Battle of Vimy Ridge. The mountain was later unofficially named after him for his deeds on the battlefield. His son Charles was in Lethbridge to share some stories. He says his father rarely liked talking about the ugliness of war, especially to his grandson.
My son asked him, "What did you do over there, Grandpa?" "Oh, I take care of horses and all." That's about all. He said, "If I start talking to you guys about it, you won't like what I did." So when I tried to get in, he says, "Whatever happened, leave it there. Don't bring it home."
Shortly after leaving his residential school, Crowchief enlisted in the Canadian military. He says he regretted going to war.
This war doesn't belong to us native guys. We have nothing to do with it. But we go over there. I found out, what am I doing here? Shooting other people. They didn't do anything to me. It says that stays in my chest.
Charles says his father Joe and his sergeant were among the first two to get to the top of Vimy Ridge. Once at the top, Crowchief let out a war cry that he says scared the Germans. It is believed that the war cry sent guardian angels that made the Germans feel like they had a much bigger threat at hand.
In our native, we believe that we're, like we say, angels, guardian angel. But for us, that's a spirit. So that's what they believe in. Young people, old guys, passed on, and they call upon them to guide and save them.
Charles also shared a story of how his father saved a wounded soldier's life at risk of being shot by Canadian soldiers.
Well, they're on the run, and they seen this guy asking for help. And my dad said, "Why?" When he got there, the leader said, "I will shoot you, both of you, right now. You know, we can't doctor him." He says, "I didn't care. I saved him from that place."
And years later in Edmonton, Joe Crowchief met that soldier's son.
They were in the bar. The guy gave it to him. He says, "Oh, you know, my dad was saved by this native. My dad's safe. I happen to be here. But he got one leg. This guy saved him. Turned the key. And he called the place where he went. My dad looked at him. He called his name. The guy just jumped at him. "So you're the guy." Because he said that man didn't call his dad. He says, "I called him." "Yeah, I know one guy," and he called him. The guy jumped on. "That's my dad."
The assault on Vimy Ridge began at 5:30 a.m. on Easter Monday, April 9th, 1917. For Bridge City News, I'm Naveen Day.
What an incredible story. Teachers became students this past week. To help them prepare for their Remembrance Day lessons, a group of social studies and history teachers from various Southern Alberta school divisions were hosted by the Lethbridge Military Museum for an evening. Now, the educators say the tour helped give them a special understanding of Lethbridge's role during war times, and it's a nugget of knowledge they can pass along in their classrooms.
That's right. It's about bringing the history to life of Southern Alberta and being able to connect with the kids in their own classrooms here.
I think that was the whole reason behind organizing tonight, is so a lot of our younger teachers who haven't had a chance to come to the museum would get a chance to come and see, the amazing array of artifacts that we have. I think a lot of people maybe don't appreciate the rich military history that Lethbridge has, and this museum is a great place to start. I think teachers will definitely take some of those stories back to their classrooms to help make Remembrance Day and the lead up to Remembrance Day more meaningful. So.
I'd love to bring my students here, for sure. And I think there's parts of this that we don't talk about. Right where we're standing right now, like even just the local history of the prisoner of war camp that we had on the north side in Lethbridge, right? And for them to come and see that and see these models, the artifacts are awesome as well, because they tell the story, right? And so there's only so much you can do in a classroom. It brings it to life a little more.
The Lethbridge Military Museum is open from noon till 4 on Wednesdays, but special tours outside of those hours can be arranged by calling the museum. Lethbridge Police Service had 4 recent town hall meetings to hear the concerns from local residents. Lethbridge Police Chief Shaheen Medizadeh says the drug crisis and related crime in our city are still the biggest concerns for most.
There is still a lot of anxiety over opioid issues, drug problems, and homelessness in the community, and that's we certainly hear that loud, and we try to do what we can in our capacity to deal with those. There were also other comments about traffic enforcement and really crime in general. So this was a great opportunity for us, obviously, to hear from our citizens, to see what's on their mind, what's keeping them up at night, and also provide them with all the stuff, all the initiatives that we have on the go, so they can be assured that we are doing whatever we can with the capacity that we have to serve the community and make it safer.
Chief Medizadeh says they'll take the concerns from the town halls to create more initiatives to better protect and serve our community. And that'll be done through the LPS's 2024 Strategic Policing Plan. A Canada-wide search warrant has been issued for a BC sex offender who cut off his monitoring bracelet. Vancouver police say 58-year-old Randall Hopley failed to return to a halfway house over the weekend and is on the run. He was expected in court on Monday to face 2 counts of breaching his supervision order, but didn't show up. Police say Hopley has a history of convictions for assault, property, and sex crimes, including 3 sex offenses against kids. Hopley's described as 5'9", 180 pounds, and was last seen wearing a black outfit along with a black hat. If you've seen him, you're asked to call 911 right away. More than 10,000 people from across Italy attended a Christ-centered festival in Rome to hear a unique message from Franklin Graham. More than 500 responded to the evangelist's invitation to give their lives to Christ.
When I saw that idea of trying to bring churches together, it caught my attention. I said, if God is doing something, I want to be part of it.
For the first time, the churches have come together, united, and prayed to win this city to Christ. This is the time for Rome. If you come to Christ tonight, you've got to follow him.
Se vieni a Gesù questa sera, devi seguirlo.
He's got to become the Lord of your life.
Lui deve diventare il Signore della tua vita.
Will you trust him?
Ti affiderai a Lui?
Will you invite Christ to come into your life?
Lo inviterai a venire nella tua vita?
If you've never done that,
Se non l'ha mai fatto,
if you're here tonight and you're not sure that your sins are forgiven,
se qui questa sera non sei sicuro che i tuoi peccati sono stati perdonati,
you can make sure right now.
Puoi esserne sicuro adesso.
You're not coming to Franklin Graham.
Non stai venendo qui da Franklin Graham.
I cannot save you.
Io non ti posso salvare.
You're coming to Jesus Christ.
Tu stai venendo a Gesù Cristo.
So come.
Venite.
Jesus is not dead. He's alive. He's here in Rome tonight.
È vivo, è qui a Roma questa sera.
Nice to see the work that Franklin's doing, continuation of his father, Billy Graham. Well, it was a beautiful sunny day in Lethbridge with the temperature above zero, and the mercury will be climbing by quite a bit as we make our way to the weekend. A full look at the weather pictures coming up. It's so nice to see most of the snow has left our region here in Lethbridge. Jeanette Rocher is now with a full look at the weather picture. Jeanette, the mercury should be climbing even further as we make our way to Remembrance Day this weekend?
Yes, even up to the double digits for Remembrance Day, Hal, as we're looking to that Saturday forecast there. There they are. There's those double digits, a high of 10 degrees on Saturday, up to 11 degrees on Sunday. We're looking at clear skies right through the rest of next week. 16 for a high on Monday. Will it be a record breaker? We're just going to have to wait and see. And then up to 12 degrees on Tuesday with mainly sunny skies. So I'm really happy with the way that the forecast is looking as we get into next week, because the average high for this time of year, 6 degrees right there. So we're going to be well above that. -6 is the average low. 22 was our record high on this day. That happened back in 2004. And on this day back in 1945, we were sitting at -26. 7:32, that's when the sun rose this morning, sunset this evening at 4:58 p.m. We're now 3 minutes shorter than yesterday, as we're at less than 9.5 hours of daylight. Okay, so we're looking at showers beginning in the morning for both Victoria and Vancouver tomorrow, and 30 to 50 winds for both of those cities, as well as Vancouver, though, could see winds up to 70 kilometers per hour along the water there. 10 degrees, though, for both of those cities. High of 6 tomorrow in Edmonton, 4 for a high in Calgary. Looking at sunny skies for both of those cities with 15 winds. Also, I should mention the wind chill factor. It's going to be, a small factor for both Edmonton and Calgary tomorrow in the morning. Mainly cloudy skies across most of Saskatchewan. Saskatoon sitting at 0 for a high, -2 for a high in Regina, 0 in Winnipeg. Winnipeg looking at 2 centimeters of snow. As we get into the central part of the country, we're looking at showers beginning in the afternoon in Toronto, high of 10 degrees there. Ottawa seeing 2 centimeters of snow or ice pellets. Could see a chance of freezing rain as well. 1 for a high there, a buildup of ice on the road, so be careful driving. 0 for a high in Montreal, looking at up to 5 centimeters of the white stuff. So they are expecting quite a bit of snow in that region. As for Atlantic Canada, could see some showers. Could see some showers mixed with flurries. That's what we're expecting in both Fredericton and Halifax. High of 5 in Fredericton, 6 for a high in Halifax, with the showers, possibility of flurries. 2 to 4 centimeters of showers, though, expected in Charlottetown. 6 degrees for a high and high of 7 degrees, but falling to -5 by the afternoon, and could see some showers there as well in St. John. So there you have it. That is your forecast.
A new study says Canadians plan to cut back on Christmas shopping plans this year. The data from BMO's Real Financial Progress Index says the cost of living increases are making it that much more difficult to pay for things like food, rent, mortgages, and utilities. That's why 78% of consumers say they plan on buying fewer gifts this year. 40% of those over the age of 18 also said they planned on buying less expensive gifts for their friends and family members. Just over half of Canadians surveyed felt financial anxiety about the holidays, with 29% saying they feel less financially secure than they did a year ago. Hydro One is reporting a third quarter profit of $357 million. Now that's up from $307 million a year ago. The power utility says its revenue, net of purchased power, totaled $1.08 billion. That's a slight increase from $1.07 billion from a year ago. Hydro One says that increase was helped by a hike in transmission rates and higher average monthly peak demand. A woman in Winnipeg who is suing Tim Hortons says she had a severe allergic reaction and her heart stopped for a short time after consuming tea that contained cream instead of almond milk that she requested. The lawsuit says on June 9th, Gabrielle Ho ordered a tea using the Tim Hortons app, and she replaced the dairy option with almond milk. It says she began suffering an allergic reaction after taking a sip of the hot drink. She called her mother, who helped her use an EpiPen, and then she was driven to hospital by a coworker. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was down 45 points on the day to finish at 19,530. The Dow was down 40 points to 34,112. The S&P 500 was up 4 on the day to 4382, and the Nasdaq was up 10 points to 13,650. West Texas Intermediate Oil was down 204 to 75.33 US per barrel. Natural gas was down 3 cents to 3.11 US. Gold was down 3 cents on the day as well to 19.50.17 US an ounce, and silver was down 5 cents to 22.59 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $9.31 per bushel, barley's at $7.29, canola's at $15.97, and corn is at $8.59 per bushel. Live cattle December contract was up 63 cents to $179.40. Feeder cattle were up $2.33 to $234.55, and lean hogs December contract was down $1.40 to $71.50. The Canadian dollar was even over the past 24 hours at 72.50 US. Recapping one of our top stories, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says close to 80 people with close ties to Canada have been evacuated from the Gaza Strip. Hundreds more are still waiting to leave. Prime Minister Trudeau says in order to extricate more Canadians along with other foreign nationals from the war-torn region, a humanitarian pause is desperately needed. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says there will be no ceasefire as long as Hamas continues to hold more than 200 hostages. Well, the legislature is back in session here in Alberta, and there are currently 6 bills before politicians right now, including one which would require our province to hold a referendum on tax increases. Our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson will share details momentarily. Listen, when you see news happening in your community, be sure to send us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. And if you missed any of today's local stories, check out our website, bridgecitynews.ca. One of the big storylines from the recent UCP convention in Calgary was the Take Back Alberta crowd. Now, it's a little more conservative compared to the mainstream aspects of the party, but it is now control over the UCP board. Now, to chat about this in more detail is our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent for the National Post, Tyler Dawson, who joins us once again from Edmonton. Tyler, how much power does the board actually have when it comes to the party?
Well, that's the thing. The board doesn't actually have a lot of power. Now, I think there's a lot of people out there who are talking about this and thinking about this in terms of the idea that there's now this board that's going to have control over Premier Danielle Smith and what she does. And that's not really how it works. The board does have a lot of power. You know, they manage fundraising and candidate nominations, and they also, you know, sort of help schedule and run leadership reviews and things like that. But, you know, they're not involved really in the day-to-day policymaking or you know, operations of government. So, you know, I think there's maybe, in some ways, perhaps going to be a little bit of disappointment from some of the people who are all fired up about the new board. And there might be a little bit of surprise from people who are concerned about it when they sort of see whether or not they have any impact on what the government's doing. So, you know, it's not as, you know, as all powerful, I think, as people are sort of making it out to be. But they certainly do have enough power, I would say, to cause Premier Danielle Smith some problems if they really want to.
As for the UCP's annual general meeting itself, Tyler, almost all of the policy proposals passed. What were some of the bigger ones in your opinion?
Well, the one that didn't pass, interestingly, was about school vouchers, but it was sort of a modification of a prior policy, so, you know, maybe not that massive of a news item. Certainly the ones that I think are going to be headline grabbers and the ones that are going to be challenging policy discussions for the government is the pronoun policy in schools, similar to what Saskatchewan and New Brunswick are doing. Whether that's something that Premier Danielle Smith chooses to adopt remains to be seen. What that debate is going to look like in the legislature remains to be seen. There are a bunch of sort of medical adjacent ones that are going to get a lot of attention, I think, certainly in quarters that are still concerned about the way the pandemic unfolded. You know, a couple of them around vaccine exemptions, but also using off-brand medication. There's a few free speech ones, for example, whether or not professional bodies like College of Psychologists, for example, should be able to regulate sort of off-the-job conduct on behalf of members, that if that becomes government policy is going to get a lot of attention. And I think some of the education ones more broadly, one of the ones that really jumped out at me was a policy that would have books that have sort of sexual or racist or violent themes removed from school libraries, which will, there's the possibility, that we have a debate about whether or not To Kill a Mockingbird should be in school libraries in a couple months. So, if that becomes government policy, I think that's going to be one that a lot of people will be paying attention to. So, and then I should also just shout out to the fact that, there were some like steady as she goes standard conservative policy things discussed, whether that was the inheritance taxes and things like that on family farms, the support for transportation, utility, and industrial corridors between various jurisdictions. So it's not all just sort of some of these culture war, socially conservative policies, but certainly I think those are the ones that people paid the most attention to and will get the most attention if they come up in the legislature.
A topic of discussion which has been dominating headlines across Canada is Alberta potentially pulling out of the CPP, going on its own with an APP. Our province's finance minister, Nate Horner, met with other provincial finance ministers last week to talk about an Alberta-made pension plan and what it would actually mean. What were some of the main takeaways from that meeting, Tyler?
Well, probably the big takeaway is that Chrystia Freeland, the federal finance minister, has asked the chief actuary of Canada to do their own math. When that report came out a few weeks ago, or maybe a couple months ago, and time is flying at the moment, it basically said Alberta was entitled to $334 billion of the CPP's total assets, which is about 53%. And that's obviously a number that the other finance ministers are concerned about. They don't want, half the CPP to walk away because that would have consequences for workers and retirees in their jurisdiction. So whatever estimate the federal government comes back with, I think is going to be, sort of the bombshell that lands. Is it substantially less than what the Alberta government thinks we're entitled to? Is it for some reason the same? That's I think really going to define the conversation going forward. And I think the other thing that came out of it is probably something that most people hadn't really thought of, and that was this idea of international pension agreements. So, if you retire somewhere else in the world, how do you get your pension? Is it administered through a national pension plan in another country? The Canadian government has, I think, more than 100 separate agreements with other countries. The Quebec pension plan, which is already separate, I think has about 80 or 60 agreements. So just some stuff that I think people hadn't maybe thought all that much about that just sort of adds to the complexity of this issue beyond just the dollar figure, beyond what it might mean for Alberta. So I think those were sort of the two big takeaways. And then the third one that probably merits mentioning is just that this is kind of Alberta against everybody else. I don't think there's been a single premier who has come out in favor of Alberta leaving the pension plan, other than obviously Danielle Smith, and Justin Trudeau and Pierre Poilievre both basically opposed to it. So the dynamic here is really, really interesting. This isn't like the carbon tax, for example, where we've had allies in other parts of the country.
And what's interesting too is the fact that Danielle Smith has said that there'll be more studying done and a referendum will actually be held to see if Albertans want to physically pull out of the CPP. And that is concerning, you're right, especially if Albertans want to retire in places which may potentially be more affordable, like Mexico, maybe a small town or a small village in Italy, where your money goes a lot further. Retirees are potentially looking outside of the box and outside of Canada. Tyler, the legislature is back in session and the UCP is legislating at record speed. They're currently around, 6 bills before politicians right now, including Bill 1, which would require Alberta to hold a referendum on tax increases.
That's right. So this is sort of a policy that California has actually had for a long time, but the basic principle is relatively simple. If there's going to be an increase to the income tax or a sales tax, whether that's corporate or personal, it would need to go to a referendum for Albertans. And so the thing that's sort of interesting about this is obviously there's the conservative ideology behind it of not wanting to increase taxes, but it also is interesting because if there comes a time when something like a sales tax is necessary, say resource revenues are cratered, it becomes quite difficult for the government to raise taxes, which is obviously the purpose of this. It makes it much more difficult for the government to raise taxes. But it'll be interesting, I guess, if we end up in a situation where all of a sudden revenues are in trouble and tax increases are needed. But of course, no one wants to pay more taxes. So the government could find itself in a little bit of a bind. But certainly it's a sign, a symbol, a symbolic step that this government does not want to raise taxes on Albertans.
Some sad news here as well, Tyler. New stats are out and Alberta's on pace to have its worst year ever for opioid deaths. Now, there are around 200 more deaths at this point than there were at the same time last year. What's the province doing about it?
Yeah, so the province is still really pushing forward on its recovery-oriented method of tackling addictions. So that looks like new recovery centers, that looks like hiring staff to work in these places, things like that. Now, of course, there's a lag time on all of that. You can't, dream up a new recovery center overnight. There's construction and hiring and all of those things. I believe they have opened 2 of them around the province, maybe 3. So that is very much ongoing. What hasn't happened yet, which I think we are going to see in the next 6 months or so, is the Compassionate Intervention Act, which is the bit of legislation that they're contemplating that would allow a judge basically to force someone into opioid treatment. It's going to be super controversial policy. It's going to be challenged legally, almost certainly, but that hasn't come up yet. And the other thing that hasn't happened yet is at the UCP convention last weekend, one of the policies that was debated was whether or not the government should end provincial funding for supervised injection sites. And that policy passed. And so that's obviously what the party grassroots want to see happen. Whether that becomes government policy, government law, that very much remains to be seen. But if that does happen, it would likely end most of the supervised injection sites around the province. And that would be very, very controversial. As you say, about 200 more deaths this year. So I think it's around 1,300 people already this year compared to about 1,100 last year. So some very, very dire numbers. There's no doubt about that.
Let's talk a little bit more about healthcare here, Tyler. The province is about to overhaul Alberta Health Services. Leaked copies of the plan made its way into the hands of reporters. Now, Health Minister Adriana LaGrange says the document in question is actually old news. It's old, and neither she nor Premier Smith disputed its accuracy.
That's right. And so that came out on Tuesday, and then Wednesday morning they held a press conference basically announcing the changes, and it did hew rather largely to the leaked plan that came out on Tuesday afternoon. It's a big overhaul, and I think, at this point, people are still sort of trying to digest it and figure out what it means. But the Coles Notes version of it is that you're going to have 4 sort of separate agencies running healthcare in the province. You're going to have AHS is going to be responsible for hospitals and acute care. You're going to have a separate board for addictions and mental health, a separate board for continuing care, and a separate board for primary care. And so it's basically just rearranging Alberta Health Services into these 4 other bureaucracies to try and streamline or make more efficient the healthcare system. Now, the government was very, very cautious about saying that, look, there's not going to be job losses at the frontline level for doctors, nurses, things like that. It's going to roll out, I believe, over the next 18 months or so. There's going to be consultations and feedback and all that sort of stuff. But I think at this point, it's hard to say exactly what this is going to do. This is certainly reorganizing a lot of the sort of behind-the-scenes administrative, bureaucratic parts of the way the health system runs. Bit harder to say maybe how this is going to change things when you go into your doctor's office, when you go into a hospital in 2 years' time, what that'll look like. So we'll see. I mean, this is not the first time Alberta's gone through big reorganizations of the healthcare system. So maybe it'll work this time.
Tyler, the province has also tabled a bill that will clarify who's in charge during an emergency like a pandemic. Can you explain?
This one's really, really interesting. So if people remember the Ingram decision, it was in regards to charges that had been laid under the Public Health Act for violations during the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, what the judge concluded in that case was that Alberta's Public Health Act basically said that these laws, these rules around the pandemic needed to be made by the Chief Medical Officer of Health, not the government or not cabinet. And of course, everyone sort of scratched their heads over that, saying, well, of course, decisions are left up to politicians. The Medical Officer of Health gives advice and they go from there. But that wasn't the way the legislation was written. So a bit of a sort of administrative or legalistic mix-up, but that did necessitate this new bit of legislation that clarifies who's actually in charge. And so this new bit of legislation clarifies that, in fact, politicians are in charge and that the Chief Medical Officer of Health gives advice and politicians take that or they don't take it and they make rules. I think this was always the way it was going to go. I don't think any government, whether that's the UCP or the NDP, would want a Chief Medical Officer of Health, deciding policy during a pandemic. And I don't think Albertans would necessarily want that either, because who do you hold accountable if you don't like what's been done? So I find it very interesting philosophically, but I can't imagine this bill is going to be wildly controversial or that it's going to change anything. It just sort of clarifies that the way things were done during the pandemic was the way that everyone sort of thinks it should be done and thought it should have done. And they just got kind of hung up on this clause in the original bit of legislation.
Let's switch gears for just a moment here. Talk about all the wildfires our province saw this season, Tyler. Now, the wildfire season has officially come to an end. It was 10 times worse than in previous years. More than 38,000 Albertans were displaced due to blazes this year.
Yeah, and a couple dozen communities had to evacuate. So quite a bad fire season, as you say. You know, in terms of the total hectares burned, about 10 times more than sort of the other recent years' trends that we've had. So really, really bad wildfire season. Ended October 31st, and it starts up again, I think, on March 1st. So the government is already planning ahead. You know, I think we talked the last time about this proposal to maybe use AI to try and figure out where the hot spots are going to be and the next fires might start up. So certainly this government is anticipating there being another bad fire year. Hopefully it won't be as bad, but, you know, preparing for the worst and hope for the best, I think, is sort of seems to be the theme right now in forest fire management.
We just recently had Premier Danielle Smith on Bridge City News. I had the honor of doing a 15-minute Q&A with her. But another journalist, former Fox News host Tucker Carlson, will be in Calgary in January to also have a conversation with Premier Smith. Any idea what they're going to chat about, Tyler?
That's a great question. You know, I would imagine they're going to talk about some of the sort of cultural stuff that we've talked about. I imagine they're going to talk about some of the pandemic stuff. You know, I think Tucker Carlson certainly leaned pretty hard into some of that. So he's going to be in Calgary, I think in January, and he's sort of giving a speech and then having a conversation with Smith. And this actually came up in the legislature. With the NDP saying, you know, look, Tucker Carlson got fired from Fox News. He's super controversial. Why is the Premier affiliating with him? That sort of thing. And the Premier said, look, I mean, I do interviews with journalists from all sorts of backgrounds, so of course I'm going to sit down and talk with Tucker Carlson. So whether one likes Tucker or not, I think every reporter is going to be watching that because it should be a bit of a spectacle in the dead of winter, I would say.
And apparently he has even more viewers since he moved his platform over to X from Fox News. You know, the support from Elon Musk, so...
You know, maybe there's a future for all of us in alternative media, you know?
That's true. He's our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent with the National Post, Tyler Dawson. Thanks so much for joining us today from Edmonton.
Thanks so much, Hal.
As winter slowly creeps in with chilly winds, icicles hanging from rooftops, and shorter days, there's another annual sight that warms our hearts and our faces. The budding mustaches appearing on the faces of men throughout November. Today we have the pleasure of welcoming Shane DeMerchant, a dedicated Movember participant, and he's actively raising funds to combat prostate cancer and champion mental health support for men. Shane, thank you for being here with us today.
Naveen, thank you so much for having me. I don't like the thought of those icicles and chilly weather coming, but hopefully no icicles off the mustache before the end of this month.
Well, let's hope so. Now, can you tell us, Shane, why are you participating in Movember this year, and what does this cause mean to you personally?
So yeah, this is the 17th annual Movember campaign in Canada. So yeah, if you want to feel old, Movember's been around for 17 years in Canada.
Wow.
I haven't been doing it for quite that long. This is my 11th year participating. But yeah, we like I mentioned earlier, we're growing mustaches this month to raise both awareness and funds for prostate cancer, testicular cancer, and men's mental health and suicide prevention. And I'm someone who would have always maybe considered myself a men's health advocate over those 11 years. I think my motivation has changed lots in terms of starting in university with some of my guy friends and trying to raise some funds for men's health with those friends at the time, to now where I'm a dad and have a 4-year-old son and a 2-year-old daughter as well. But know the challenges that come with balancing family life and work life, and now trying to raise my own 4-year-old son. So yeah, my motivations have changed over those 11 years in terms of who I think of when I'm raising funds every year for Movember. But yeah, I think that's probably the case for a lot of our community over these last 17 years.
So you say that you've been involved with Movember for 11 years. Can you just share how much money you have raised so far for Movember, and what impact do these funds have on men's health initiatives?
So as someone who works for Movember, I am not always the best fundraiser. I had to look this up before our interview, Naveen, to make sure I got it right. So I personally have raised around $8,000 for Movember. We have people who will raise that in a single year. So yeah, I'm not the shining star when it comes to fundraising every single year. But I will say, over those 17 years at Movember, we have funded more than 300 innovative men's health programs across those three that I mentioned before. So prostate cancer, testicular cancer, and men's mental health. New programs that are coming up every single year. About 4 or 5 weeks ago in September, Movember just announced $5.8 million in funding for prostate cancer programs in Canada. At Movember, we're actually the second largest funder of research for prostate cancer outside of the federal government in Canada. So yeah, a lot of pretty incredible work that's taken place because of some silly mustaches in the conversation.
Now, you're talking about 300 projects that Movember supports. Where does this money go, and what specific health projects and causes are being supported through Movember?
So we fund programs right across the country. There's not a province where we haven't funded some form of Movember or some sort of men's health project. I think on the mental health side, there are a couple of them that I can highlight that anyone can check out on our website. I will say this for anyone who's interested: on Movember.com, across the top of the website, there's a men's health section. Underneath there, when you look under impact, we have details on all 300 plus of the programs that we've ever funded. One of the ones that I'm incredibly proud of is a set of programs that we funded in partnership with first responders across Canada. So that's a community that I've been fortunate enough to work pretty closely with on the Movember side of things. So yeah, through the tail end of COVID, we funded 4 mental health support projects for first responders right across the country. So we've made a couple of videos you can check out about how those ones work. So on the mental health side, that's one I'm really proud of. We funded a mental health tool that anyone can check out that's essentially designed to help all of us have better conversations with the men in our lives about mental health. It's just called Movember Conversations. So the URL for that is conversations.movember.com. Anyone can check it out and walk through a few different scenarios on how to get a conversation started with a guy about their mental health, the types of questions to ask, and maybe some of the support that you can offer.
Now, for those who are interested in contributing, what are the various ways people can give to support Movember's mission?
Yeah, most people know us for the mustaches. I have a fledgling mustache on my face a few days in, and it's long enough to show up on the camera, so I'm proud of that. But it's not all about mustaches. When folks go to register at Movember.com, you can register to either grow a mustache. You can register to move and stay active for the course of the month. So that's where we encourage folks to either run or walk for 60 kilometers over 30 days. The number 60 there being significant represents the 60 men that we lose to suicide on average every single hour globally. So essentially one a minute. Yeah, in Canada, 3 to 4 people who die by suicide are men, so we're losing way too many men too early to suicide. So that's where the number 60 comes from in that case. And then you can register to host an event, so that can kind of be anything and everything, whether it's a hockey tournament or dodgeball game or hot wing eating contest, whatever you can do to bring your community of supporters together. And then the last way is kind of a catch-all, choose your own adventure. We love our mustache puns, so it's called mow your own way. So again, whether what you need to do or what you can do to start conversations this month is cycling or kayaking, depending on where you are in the country. Pretty chilly for that, but some folks do it. A chili cook-off, whatever you can do to keep the conversations rolling. We're here for all of it, as long as it's safe and as long as it's legal.
Well, you had me at hot wings and chili. Now, can you explain the origins of Movember and how it has evolved into this global movement that it is today?
Yeah, one of the first questions that people always ask me is how the mustache became synonymous with the men's health movement. I mentioned this is the 17th annual Movember campaign in Canada. The origins of Movember actually go back 20 years, so 2 decades, starting not in Canada, but in Melbourne, Australia, with a couple of friends sitting around on a Sunday afternoon, having some lunch and some drinks and talking not about men's health necessarily, but men's fashion and the fact that the mustache hadn't really become fashionable yet. I think they were like me, children of the 80s, and had dads growing up watching Magnum PI and Burt Reynolds and growing a mustache at the time. So they said, hey, let's try to bring the mustache back this month. So they spent the month of November growing a mustache, recruited some of their friends to do it with them. And the one thing they all realized in that first year, that first month formerly known as November, was that no matter where they went, people commented on the mustache. So whether it was hanging out with friends or family or at work, everyone asked them what the deal with the mustache was. So they knew they had hit on the power of the mustache to create conversations. They said, let's give ourselves an excuse to do this next year, but put some greater meaning behind it. Started to raise some funds for men's mental health in that first year, specifically prostate cancer in the first year. They realized that at the time, the rates of prostate cancer in men were very similar to the rates of breast cancer in women. Right now, 1 in 8 men in Canada will be diagnosed with prostate cancer in their lifetime. So started to raise not just the funds, but awareness and fastest history of lesson of all time that shoots us forward 20 years, where we've had more than 5 million people globally participate in the Movember campaign in one way or another across 20 plus countries around the globe. So a lot of really, really incredible work that's been inspired by a jokey conversation in Melbourne 20 years ago.
That's just amazing how it evolved into something so amazing and big in such a small amount of time. Now, Movember just isn't a guy thing. How can women actively participate and contribute to Movember's campaigns and awareness initiatives?
Exactly. So I always joke that maybe unsurprisingly, some of our best supporters are women, whether that's guys maybe not being the most organized or relying on the women of their lives to get some initiatives off the ground. But I mentioned the 4 different ways to register. If a mustache isn't your thing, if you can't grow a mustache, anyone can register to host an event. Anyone can register to stay active this month. I think every single one of us has a man in our life that we care about, that we want to keep around as long as possible. We're losing way too many men too early for a lot of preventable reasons. So if we can get men to be a little bit more proactive with their own health, to check in with their doctor to see what's wrong, to figure out what it means for them to be in the self-care space, in the wellness space, in the proactive space when it comes to their own health. And we all have a role to play there. We encourage anyone to get involved with those conversations this month.
Now, everybody has a why behind why they do certain things. And for you, you were talking about your children. What's your focus this year? What's your why behind participating in Movember for 2023?
Yeah, I love that question. My why is really for 3 people, probably. I mentioned my son, he's 4 years old. This is my 11th year doing Movember. And I can say the public health conversation around men's health, the conversations around masculinity, what it means to be a man, have changed a lot in those last 11 years. I expect that they'll continue to change just as much in the next 11 years. And I hope that in my life, the things that have kept maybe myself and the people around me from feeling comfortable chatting about our own health and checking in with the guys in our lives where we felt like they maybe needed those check-ins. I hope that when he grows to be not necessarily as old as me, but as he's growing up, that he is more comfortable than our generation was having some of those conversations, and that he recognizes when he himself needs to reach out for help, that's not a sign of weakness, that's a sign of courage to recognize that in yourself, and that he's a lot more comfortable maybe than our generation was doing that, Naveen.
And you talked about the numbers of prostate cancer cases being on par with breast cancer, which affects primarily women. Do you have some stats to share on prostate cancer and maybe also on men's mental health and suicide?
Yeah, so on the mental health side of things, unfortunately in Canada, this is a stat that is pretty consistent across most countries. 3 to 4 people who die by suicide are men. Suicide's the second leading cause of death in young men and boys between the ages of 15 and 44 in Canada. So we're losing way too many men too early. We're allowing boys and men to get to a point of crisis. And then when they are at that point of crisis, we haven't prepped them with the literacy, we haven't prepped them with the tools, we haven't prepped them with a knowledge of what support is out there once they get to that point. So our mission at Movember is to work upstream and keep boys mentally healthy as much as we can and keep them from getting that point of crisis to that point of crisis. But when they do, we want to make sure that they're comfortable reaching out for help. They know who to reach out to help for, and they've had the conversations before they get there so that they know what's available to them. And like I said, even for my own son, once they get to a point where they're struggling, they recognize that not as a sign of weakness, but say, hey, this is a point of strength for me to know when to reach out to someone else for help.
Now, can you just walk us through the process of making a donation to Movember, and what percentage of the funds raised go directly to men's health projects? Because every charity has an overhead.
Yeah, absolutely. No matter what we do, even though it's cheap to grow a mustache, there's still lots of little expenses that go into keeping the campaign running every single year and keeping those programs. I mentioned the 300 programs running every single year. So in answer to your second question, it fluctuates a bit every single year, but it tends to hover around that 85% of all funds going directly into men's health programs in Canada. I think for last year, it was just under that. So around 84% of all funds are going into men's health programs in Canada from the dollars we raise. And then for folks who are interested in making a donation, if you do have someone in your life who's participating or who's growing a mustache this month, you can find them on our website, Movember.com. So everyone who is participating will register their own page on Movember. You can search their name on their page. We'll have a little button where you can choose to donate. If you would just like to make a donation to Movember in general, you can do that as well. So if you head over to Movember.com, there's always a donate button across the top where you can make a donation to support our work.
Shane DeMerchant is an active Movember participant, now in his 11th year of fundraising. Shane, thanks for all your time, and we wish you all the best.
Anytime. Thank you so much, Naveen.
I'm Naveen Day. On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, thanks for watching.